Montana Territory. Autumn of 1872, the wind carried a cold bite that warned winter was creeping closer. Victor Nash pulled his coat tighter as his horse trotted along the dusty trail that cut through the Bitterroot Valley. The sun was low, throwing long shadows from the pine-covered hills. He had just come from delivering supplies to a ranch up north and was heading back to his cabin near Darby when he saw her, a girl. Sitting alone by the edge of the road, her dress was torn at the hem, streaked with dust. Her hands were folded in her lap, still and pale. And her eyes, though wide open, stared at nothing. They were clouded over, pale as river glass. She was holding a small tin cup in her hands. It shook slightly in the breeze. Victor slowed his horse and dismounted. He approached carefully, boots crunching softly over the gravel. "Miss," he said, voice low. She turned her face toward the sound, but her expression stayed flat. "If you have anything to spare," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I would be grateful." He crouched in front of her. "What are you doing out here alone?" "I am waiting," she said, a little firmer now. "For someone kind." Victor looked around. There was no wagon, no tracks, no sign she had come from anywhere nearby. "Where's your family?" Her jaw tensed. "Gone." He hesitated for a beat. She was young, 20s maybe, but her face was worn down by the kind of pain most people never spoke of. She had no coat, only a thin shawl wrapped around her shoulders. "What's your name?" he asked. "Zadie," she said, voice steady. "Zadie Bell." He nodded slowly. "Well, Zadie Bell, I am not about to leave you out here to freeze. I have a place not far from here. You can come with me. Warm up, eat something." She tilted her head. "I don't want charity." "It ain't charity," Victor said. "It's decency." She was silent for a moment, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Victor helped her up, careful not to startle her. She was light, fragile as a branch in late autumn. He lifted her onto his horse, then climbed up behind her, keeping one hand lightly on her waist to steady her. They rode in silence. The forest closed around them, branches creaking overhead. When they reached his cabin, tucked back against a ridge, Victor helped her down and guided her inside. It was a modest place, one main room with a stone hearth and a cot near the far wall. He got the fire going and handed her a blanket. "Sit by the fire," he said. "I'll make something hot." She sat, hands stretched toward the warmth. Her fingers were trembling. Victor ladled stew into a bowl and brought it to her. "Careful, it's hot." Zadie took the bowl, hands brushing his. "Thank you." They ate in silence until she spoke again. "You live here alone?" "I do," Victor said. "Been on my own since the war ended." She was quiet for a moment. "You fought," he nodded. "Union Army, lost 2 brothers and a part of myself I do not think I will ever get back." Zadie set her bowl down. "I lost everything in Kansas. My parents, my home. There was a raid. I was hit during it, woke up blind." Victor sat across from her. "I am sorry." "I came west with a man who said he'd take care of me," she said. "He left me by the road yesterday, said I was too much trouble." Victor's jaw clenched. "You are not trouble." Zadie turned toward his voice. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," he said. That night he set up a cot for her near the hearth. As she laid down, she whispered, "Thank you, Victor." He paused at the doorway. "You are safe now." The next morning, Victor found her standing by the open window, hands lifted slightly. "You all right?" he asked. "I can hear the birds," she said softly, "and the creek. I know where everything is. I have to listen." He watched her for a long moment, then asked, "You ever used your hands for anything, sewing, carving?" She turned toward him. "My mother taught me to sew. But after I lost my sight, people stopped trusting I could do anything useful." Victor crossed the room and took down a piece of soft leather from a shelf. "Try something." She hesitated, then reached out, running her hands over the hide. Her fingers moved slowly at first, then faster, more confident. "This is elk hide." Victor blinked. "That is right," she smiled faintly. "I can feel the texture and the thickness. It is good for gloves." He handed her a needle and thread. Her hands moved with surprising precision. Tiny, even stitches formed along the edge. Victor watched in awe. "You are gifted." Zadie's smile widened. "I just needed someone to see that." That afternoon he brought her more materials. She worked quietly by the fire, sewing gloves, small pouches, even a soft leather belt. Her fingers never faltered. Over the next few days, the cabin changed. Her presence filled it with warmth. Victor caught himself watching her as she worked, listening to her hum quietly, her head tilted in concentration. She laughed once, a light, bright sound that cracked something open in him. "You laugh like that often?" he asked one evening. "Not in a long time," she said, "but I feel safe here." Victor leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "I am glad." That night, as he banked the fire and turned to his own bed, Zadie's voice stopped him. "Victor? Yeah. Would it be all right if I stayed a little longer?" He looked at her, lit by the orange glow of the embers, her face soft and hopeful. "You can stay as long as you like," he said. She smiled. "Then I would like that." Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the trees. But inside, the cabin was warm. And for the first time in years, Victor felt something besides emptiness settle in his chest. Hope. By the second week, a rhythm began to settle between them. Victor rose before dawn to chop wood or tend his traps, and Zadie, still wrapped in her blanket, would listen for the scrape of his boots moving across the floorboards. She'd learned to navigate the cabin with care, memorizing the placement of chairs, shelves, and the wood stove by touch and step count. The silence between them was often comfortable, filled with the soft clatter of tools or the rustle of thread through hide. One evening, while the wind sighed low through the pine outside, she set down her latest stitching and said, "There's a faint smell of horses. You keep more than one?" Victor looked up from the sharpening stone in his lap. "Just two. Old pack mares out in the lean-to behind the cabin." "You got a way of sensing things most folks miss." "It's all I have now," she said, fingers folding into her lap. "I listened close." He nodded, then stood to fetch more kindling. As he passed, she reached out and lightly touched his sleeve. "You have a wife somewhere?" she asked. "No," he said, setting the wood down by the hearth. "I thought about it once, before the war, but life moved sideways after that." She gave a small, thoughtful breath. "You seem like someone who wouldn't leave a woman behind." "I wouldn't," he said, meeting her gaze even though she couldn't see it. Zadie leaned back against the post near the fire, her head tilted slightly. "Most men I've met looked right through me. Even before I couldn't see." Victor sat across from her again, elbows on his knees. They were fools. The fire cracked, sending up a brief shower of sparks. Zadie tilted her head toward the sound. "There's something I want to try," she said, "but I'll need your help." He waited. "I used to draw patterns in the dirt with a stick," she continued. "My mother would trace them with me, then show me how to stitch the shape. I think I could still do it if I had slate or something like it. Something I could feel with my fingers while I worked." Victor stood without a word and walked out into the dark. When he returned, he carried in a flat board, smooth on one side with a shallow rim carved around the edge. He set it in front of her, then handed her a piece of chalk. Zadie ran her fingers over the surface. "This will work." The next morning, he found her at the table, tracing a looping curve across the slate with one hand while the other followed behind, measuring the space between each mark. "You up early," he said, setting down a handful of dried herbs near the stove. "I had a shape in my mind," she said. "A kind of flowering vine. I wanted to get it down before it left me." Victor leaned in to watch. The shape she'd drawn was delicate, curling like a tendril in spring. "You remember all this from touch," she nodded. "It's the only way I know how." Later that day, he rode into town with a list in his pocket: linen thread, finer needles, a few lengths of soft wool. When he returned, she was outside, one hand on the porch post, face turned toward the sun. "You all right out here?" he asked as he dismounted. "I can smell the pine sap," she said, smiling faintly. "It's stronger in the sun." He handed her the small, wrapped parcel. "Got you some new materials to work with." She opened the cloth bundle carefully, fingers discovering each item. "These are finer threads," she said, "and this wool, Victor, this is good, soft spun. Thought you'd make something real nice with it." She hesitated, then asked, "Would you let me make you something?" He crouched beside her. "You don't have to make me a thing." "I want to," she said. You've given me more than I can return, but I'd like to try. He nodded once. All right, then I'd be honored. That night she worked by the fire with her brows drawn close in concentration. Victor watched her hands move, swift and sure. He said nothing until she paused to stretch her fingers. Ever think of teaching it, what you know, to who? She asked, not unkindly. Other women, girls maybe. There's settler families out here with daughters who'd learn quick. I wouldn't know how to start, she said, quiet again. I think you already have. She didn't answer, but her shoulders relaxed. When she resumed sewing, her hands moved with renewed steadiness. Outside, the moon rose behind the ridge, casting pale light over the clearing. Inside, the fire burned low, and the air was filled with the soft rhythm of thread pulling through cloth. Neither of them said much, but something had shifted, something steady, something beginning. And for the first time, the cabin no longer felt like only his. A week later, the first snow fell in the high country. Not heavy, just a dusting across the ridgeline, but enough to warn that the season was turning. Victor brought in the last of the firewood from the lean-to, brushing snow from his shoulders as he stepped inside. Zadie was seated at the work table he'd built for her, tracing her fingers over the finished piece of wool she'd been shaping the past 2 days. She didn't look up when he entered, but her hand paused. "You're colder than yesterday," she said. "You rode farther." Checked the trapline down by the ravine. One of the snares had been sprung, looked like a fox. She tilted her head slightly. "Was it gone clean?" "Left fur snagged on the wire," he said, "but nothing else." She nodded once, then returned her hand to the edge of the wool. "I finished the collar seam. Do you want to feel it?" Victor crossed the room and rested his hand along the edge where she guided him. The stitching was tight and even the folds smooth. "You keep surprising me," he said. Zadie smiled, not wide but sure. "I don't think I'm surprising. I think people just don't expect much." He sat down opposite her. "Most folks out here don't know what to expect from anything. They just get through the day." "I don't want to get through," she said. "I want to build something." Victor watched her fingers as they folded the wool carefully and tied it with a strip of scrap muslin. "What would you build if you could?" "A place where I belong," she said. "Not where someone's letting me stay, a shop maybe. Or just a room with a door that's mine." Victor leaned his forearms on the table. "You could sell your work easy. Folks in town pay good money for something that lasts." She folded her hands over her lap. "I wouldn't know where to start." "I could help you," he said. "If you wanted." Zadie was quiet for a long time, the fire popping softly behind her. Then she said, "Why are you being so kind to me?" Victor didn't answer right away. He reached for the kettle and poured water into the tin cups. He set one in front of her, the steam curling between them. "I've spent years not speaking to anyone," he said. "Didn't think I needed to, but you walk into a room and fill it, even when you don't say a thing." She reached for the cup, found the handle, and held it between her palms. "I don't know what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything." Her shoulders eased, but her voice stayed low. "That man who left me by the road, he told me I was lucky he took me at all." Victor's breath caught, but he kept his hand still around his cup. "He was wrong. I believed him," she said. "For a long time." He stood and moved to the hearth, crouching to stoke the fire. "I don't know what it's like to be left behind like that, but I know what it means to carry someone else's words too long." She turned her head toward him. "What did they tell you?" "That I came back wrong," he said. "That I should have died like my brothers." Silence stretched between them, long and solemn. Then Zadie spoke, voice steady. "Then I think we were both lied to." Victor looked at her, her face soft in the firelight, her chin lifted just enough to show she meant every word. That night, she didn't go to her cot. Instead, she sat by the hearth long after the fire burned low, her shawl pulled close. Victor joined her, both of them quiet. After a while, she said, "I don't want to go into winter alone." Victor didn't answer with words. He reached out, gently took her hand and held it in his palm. Her fingers curled slowly around his. She didn't pull away, and that was the answer. The snow deepened over the following days, blanketing the pines and muffling the sound of the world. Victor kept the trail to the creek passable. But most mornings the frost on the windows told him they wouldn't be going far for a while. Inside, the cabin held the warmth of low flames and quiet work. Zadie was stitching the last panel of what she told him would be a winter coat. She had cut it from undyed wool he'd brought in from a trader in Corvallis, the texture finer than anything he'd worn. Her hands moved slow this time, not from doubt but from care. Victor leaned against the wall, watching her fingers draw the needle through the fabric. "You ever think about color?" he asked. She paused, one hand resting flat on the table. "I remember some. My mother wore blue when she was happy." "What color were you drawn to?" "I liked green, not bright. The kind that sits quiet on moss." He stepped toward the shelf and took down a small box he hadn't opened in years. Inside were Button's bone, horn, carved wood, a few polished stones. He set the box beside her hand. Zadie ran her fingers over the contents. "Where'd these come from?" "Collected them along the way. Some were from trade posts, some carved myself. Never found the right thing to use them on." Her hand stopped over a smooth disc. "This has ridges, like tree bark, juniper. Took me half a day to shape it round." She lifted it, turning it gently between her fingers. "Could I use these on the coat?" "They are yours now." She set the button down and reached for her thread again. "I think I'd like to try adding a pocket." Victor settled into the chair across from her. "What for?" "So I've got somewhere to keep a small blade or a pencil stub." Her mouth curved slightly. "Don't want to go soft just because I'm warm." The wind outside picked up, nudging snow off the roof in soft thumps. Victor watched her bend back over her work, her brow furrowed, the firelight catching the curve of her jaw. "Did you ever think about staying in one place?" he asked. Zadie didn't look up. "That's all I ever wanted, but no one ever let me." "You've got the skill to do it now." "You could build a name." "I don't need a name," she said. "I just want to be somewhere I matter." He stood, walked to the window, and looked out over the clearing. The snow had stopped. The trees stood still, dark against the pale sky. "There's land east of here," he said. "Flat, open, with a stream. I cleared it years ago but left it wild. Could build something there if you wanted room." She set the needle down and faced toward his voice. "Why would you offer me that?" "Because I want to see what you'd make of it." Her hands folded in her lap. "And what would you do?" "I'd build beside you." She didn't speak for a long while, only the fire moved, whispering low. Then she said, "I can't promise anything beyond tomorrow." "I'm not asking for promises," he said. "Just the chance to keep choosing each day." Zadie stood and crossed the room slowly. She stopped when her hand found the back of his chair. "You've never asked me for anything," she said. "I didn't need to." She reached forward and touched his chest, just above the collar. Her fingers drifted careful until they found the scar just under the edge of his shirt. She let them rest there. "I'd like to stay," she said. "Not just for winter." Victor covered her hand with his. "Then stay." And for the first time, neither of them felt like they were waiting for something better to come. They were already standing in it. Victor hitched the sled behind the mare before first light, the morning air brittle against his skin. The sky had cleared overnight, revealing a pale stretch of stars, and the wind had dropped to a hush. He packed the last of the lumber, securing each board with rope, and turned to find Zadie standing at the cabin door, wrapped in a thick shawl she'd made from scraps of wool and hide. "I want to come with you," she said. He crossed the yard and offered his arm. "There's a lot of uneven ground between here and the East Ridge. I'll walk us slow." She took his arm, her grip steady. "I want to feel the land for myself." They moved together, her boots crunching softly in the snow beside his. The sled creaked behind them, carrying what they'd need for the foundation tools, nails, and lengths of timber Victor had milled in the warm weeks before autumn turned. When they reached the clearing, the wind shifted through the pines with a sound like breath being held. The spot she'd chosen was close to the waterline, with flat ground and sun all morning. Zadie stood still, turning her face toward the light, and then took 3 steps forward, brushing her gloved hand over a low stump. "This is good earth," she said. Victor unloaded the boards one at a time. "Once we get the frame up, I can add the stove." Should keep the place warm enough while we finish the rest. I want to help, she said. I can hold nails, measure cloth, tell you if something feels off. He handed her a strip of twine. Then you're hired. They worked until the sun was overhead, Victor sawing and hammering while Zadie ran her hands along the edges of the boards and double-checked spacing with a stick she'd notched earlier that week. She caught a misaligned beam before he did, tapping the corner with her knuckles. This one's off by a finger width, he looked, then nodded. You've got a builder's sense. She smiled, brushing snow from her coat. I've got a mind for patterns. By late afternoon, the walls stood waist-high and they paused to eat on a fallen log. Victor handed her a tin of cornbread and dried apples and they ate in silence, watching the sky shift toward dusk. After it's built, Zadie said, I want to use the front room for work. Hang cloth along the wall so I can feel the grain before I cut. I can build shelves low near the left side. Easy reach. And a wide table, she said, for laying out finished pieces. Victor nodded. What about the rest? She hesitated. A small room in back for sleeping, but only if it's ours. He looked at her, his hand still resting on his thigh. It's always been meant for two. Her fingers found his. I've waited a long time to feel steady. You're not standing alone anymore. The next days passed in quiet effort. Victor framed the roof while Zadie stitched window coverings from old flour sacks and dyed them with boiled walnut husks. She added a row of buttons along the edge of one, carved from the same juniper he'd given her. When he hung them, the room darkened just enough to feel like shelter. By the week's end, the stove stood in the corner and the floor was laid firm. They moved in the next morning, carrying only what they needed: a cot, a kettle, her sewing tools, and a small cedar box she'd kept tucked behind the hearth for weeks. Victor set the box on the shelf she'd claimed for her thread. You never said what was in this. She opened the lid and ran her fingers over the contents. My mother's shears. I wrapped them in cloth after the fire. I didn't think I'd use them again. They still cut, like they were waiting. That night they lay beneath a pile of quilts she'd stitched from saved scraps, their shoulders pressed close. The stove crackled, casting a low glow across the rafters. Victor's hand rested over hers and they stayed like that, the silence between them full of knowing. You ever think about what comes next? He asked. I think about tomorrow, she said, and the day after. And I think about waking up beside you. He turned toward her, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. Then I'll be here every morning. She leaned in, her lips brushing his with the care of someone who had waited long enough to know the worth of patience. The kiss was unhurried, deep with promise. Outside, snow fell soft through the dark, covering the old tracks, making room for new ones. Spring came slowly that year. The thaw revealed green shoots near the creek and birds returned in fluttering waves. Victor rebuilt the corral near the edge of the new homestead, and Zadie began taking orders from women in town: gloves, belts, and a shoulder satchel that became the talk of every Sunday gathering. She taught 2 neighbor girls how to stitch simple seams, guiding their hands with her own. They came every Thursday, bringing stories and laughter that lingered in the corners long after they'd gone. Victor added a porch by the end of April. In the evenings, they sat there, Zadie with her hands folded, Victor with his boots propped on the rail listening to the creek and the hush of dusk settling in. And when the sun dipped behind the ridge, he would turn to her always and she would nod, knowing he was looking. They'd rise together, step inside and close the door behind them. Peace had not come all at once, but it had come, and it stayed.